What if the exact thing you are most terrified of doing today is like the only thing that will actually give your life purpose?
That is quite the question to start with.
Right. Well, welcome to the deep dive. You know, usually when we talk about being a good person, the definition we use is incredibly passive.
Oh, absolutely. It's very defensive.
Yeah, it's like taking the Hippocratic Oath or something. First, do no harm, you pay your taxes, you don't yell at retail
To
workers.
keep your lawn somewhat presentable.
Exactly. And society just stamps you with this good person label. It's clean, it's safe.
But the standard of goodness just becomes entirely at what you manage to avoid doing. You don't steal, you don't cheat, therefore you are good.
Right. But today we are exploring a document titled The War Within, and it flips that passive definition completely on its head.
It really does. It completely disrupts that safe posture.
Because this text synthesizes this incredible cross-section of thought. We've got 19th century philosophers like Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Leo Tolstoy.
Which is a heavy lineup already.
Yeah, and then it mixes them with modern voices like Stephen Pressfield, Robert Greene, Will Smith, and even ancient behavioral frameworks like the Book of Proverbs.
And the picture they paint of the moral landscape is, it's demanding, it's proactive.
Frankly, it's a little intimidating.
For sure. Because it demands that you actively construct something with your life, rather than just, tiptoeing through it quietly, trying not to break anything.
Exactly. And the spark that lights the powder keg for this whole philosophy is this deceptively simple challenge from Thoreau. He wrote, "Be not simply good, be good for something."
Be good for something. Yeah, that changes the whole equation.
It does, because most of us just want to fly under the radar. But today, our mission is to explore what your goodness is actually for.
And the fascinating thing is, figuring that out requires a direct confrontation with the very things that, make our palms sweat.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to figure out what our goodness is for, we have to look at the massive invisible wall that stops us.
Right, the psychological barrier.
Yeah. And the author, Stephen Pressfield, he gives this invisible wall a name. He calls it resistance.
Resistance with a capital R.
Yes. And he argues that resistance almost always manifests as fear. But I have an analogy here that really helped me process this.
Let's hear it.
So usually we treat fear like a giant flashing red stop sign. Like if you feel fear before a career change or a difficult conversation, you assume you're doing something wrong.
Right, you think you're out of your depth, so you turn back.
Exactly. But Pressfield basically argues we should treat fear like a metal detector on a beach.
Oh, I like that.
Right. The louder the fear beeps, the closer you are to the treasure.
What's fascinating here is that inversion. Pressfield states that the degree of fear we feel about a specific endeavor is mathematically proportional to how much that endeavor matters.
Matters to what? Exactly.
To the growth of our soul, to our evolution. But, we have to be careful here. We aren't talking about physical danger.
Oh, right. Like standing on a cliff.
Exactly. If you're on the edge of a cliff and feel fear, listen to it. That's your biology keeping you alive.
Keep stepping back.
Right. But psychological fear, the dread of starting a business, writing a book, being vulnerable with a partner, that is a highly tuned compass.
So why does our brain conflate the two? Like, why does starting a creative project feel like staring down a tiger?
Because the primitive parts of our brain don't differentiate between physical death and ego death.
Wow. Wait, really?
Yeah. To your amygdala, public failure or social rejection feels like being exiled from the tribe, which historically meant starvation.
So the stakes literally feel like life and death.
Precisely. And resistance is a shapeshifter that uses that primal panic. The voice in your head won't just say, "I'm terrified,"
We'll say, you're too ordinary.
or "the market is too saturated," or "you need another degree first."
Oh, yeah. The excuses always sound so rational and sophisticated.
But the core emotion powering them is always just pure, unadulterated fear.
Which perfectly sets up this brutal truth from Will Smith that's in the text. He says, the first step before anybody else in the world believes is that you believe it.
Which is the hardest part.
It is, because we want the sequence of success reversed, don't we? We want the confidence first as an advance loan.
Right, give me the confidence, and then I'll take the action.
Exactly.
But the human brain is an evidence-gathering machine. It simply will not generate genuine confidence without proof.
So the action has to precede the certainty.
It has to. Confidence is a trailing indicator of action, not a prerequisite. You have to step toward the fear first, take the action while your hands are shaking.
And then the brain says, oh, we survived that. Here is a little bit of confidence for next time.
Exactly. which connects to Catherine Seligman's plain advice in the text. She says, you can't hit a home run unless you step up to the plate.
You can't catch a fish unless you put your line in the water.
Right, and stepping up isn't just a folksy sports metaphor. The plate is the fear. The water is the unknown.
You don't wait for the fear to vanish. You take the bat off your shoulder while you are actively terrified.
Because stepping into that discomfort is the literal first movement of a meaningful life. The world does not rearrange itself to accommodate the timid.
Okay, so if fear is the compass, and we know we have to step up to the plate, the immediate next question is, what does that first step actually look like?
Right, the practical application.
Because I know my own patterns. Even when the metal detector is screaming, I freeze. Because I assume the action I take needs to be grand and flawless and immediately visible to everyone.
Which is the ultimate trap of modern achievement culture. We crave the spectacle of success more than the substance of it.
Yes. And Erwan Lacour's physical training philosophy captures this perfectly. He says, prioritize function, seek real-world physical capability, and your physique will follow.
He's talking about the gym, but it maps onto real life so well.
It really is a brilliant indictment of how we usually operate. If we focus on the real functional work, the visible results naturally trail behind.
But today, everyone wants that cosmetic appearance of change without digging up the root system.
We want the abs without doing the heavy lifting.
Exactly. And that desire for spectacle leads directly to a massive waste of human energy. Terry Laughlin, the master swimming coach, points this out beautifully.
Well, I loved this part.
He notes that human beings are naturally energy-wasting machines. When we get in the water, our instinct is to thrash.
We kick hard, we splash everywhere.
Because our brain assumes that if it feels incredibly difficult, we must be making progress.
Thrashing equals trying.
To our detriment, yes. But Laughlin has this deeply meditative line. He says, anything, if done more quietly, is more effective.
That is so profound.
Think about the physics of swimming. Splashing means you are fighting the medium. You're wasting energy vertically instead of propelling yourself horizontally.
So true efficiency in the water is silent. You just slip through it.
Exactly.
And I can vividly see how that maps to, the modern workplace. Thrashing in the water is the equivalent of sending emails at 11:30 p.m. just to ensure your boss knows you're online.
Performative stress.
Yeah. We wear our burnout like a badge of honor to prove we're doing something meaningful, but the most capable people usually operate with a quiet, unhurried precision.
They focus on the quality of the repetition rather than the volume of the applause.
But getting to that quiet repetition brings us to a piece of advice in the text that I really wrestled with.
Woo. Which one?
There is a daily affirmation quoted that simply says, to find success, set the bar low.
Yeah.
Practically speaking, I struggle with that. We are talking about finding our life's purpose and overcoming existential fear. Doesn't setting the bar low just sound like an invitation to total mediocrity?
It sounds counterintuitive, I know. But we have to look at the psychology of friction. It's not about mediocrity.
What is it about then?
It is a vital inoculation against perfectionism. And perfectionism is just resistance wearing a tuxedo.
Resistance in a tuxedo. I love that.
Yeah. It's fear masquerading as elite standards. Think of a college student who spends 4 hours color-coding a beautifully formatted study schedule, but never actually opens the textbook.
Right, because the standard was so high, they needed the perfect study session.
So they opted for the illusion of work rather than the messy reality of it. The person who waits for perfect conditions never starts.
I hear that. But let me push back a bit harder. If I lower the bar and tell myself, I am just going to write one terrible, flawed paragraph today, aren't I just building a habit of producing garbage?
You would be if the goal was to stop at one paragraph forever. But the goal is to overcome the initial friction of starting.
Okay, the static friction.
Exactly. Physics tells us that static friction, the force required to get a stationary object to move, is always greater than kinetic friction, which keeps it moving.
Right.
By setting the bar incredibly low, you are hijacking your own brain's resistance to effort. You are training the neural pathway of starting. Once you are in motion, your natural competence takes over.
Ah, so it's a momentum hack. You bypass the ego's demand for perfection just to get into the room where the work happens.
And over a lifetime, that momentum builds something profound. Leo Tolstoy touches on this in his Calendar of Wisdom.
Where he talks about character being built in the small detail.
Yes. He argues that true character is not forged in cinematic, heroic moments where the world is watching. It is built in 10,000 quiet, imperceptible moments of integrity.
When nobody's watching.
Exactly. It's the decision to listen to a friend without checking your phone. It's the choice to rewrite that email so it's a little kinder.
Those are the quiet, quality repetitions Laughlin was talking about.
You got it.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because this transition from the internal to the external is fascinating.
It gets complicated once other people are involved.
It really does, because so far, we've focused on governing our own minds, hacking perfectionism, taking quiet action, but we don't live in a vacuum.
Right. Eventually you step outside.
And you inevitably collide with power dynamics and other people's egos. So how do we navigate relationships without losing that goodness we just cultivated?
Well, this is where the synthesis of these ideas gets incredibly complex, because the text introduces a stark ideological clash for us to navigate.
It's a massive contradiction. On one hand, you have Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power, and he highlights a law used by Queen Elizabeth I. Do not commit to anyone.
Which is all about maintaining leverage.
Right. Greene's argument is that independence is the root of power. If you allow people to possess you or hand over your loyalty too quickly, you lose your leverage.
From a purely strategic standpoint, it's a method of protecting your agency so that you aren't a pawn in someone else's game.
But reading it, it sounds incredibly cold and cynical. I mean, it implies that you should treat human beings like chess pieces.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, though, the text doesn't let Greene's strategy stand alone. It immediately introduces a counterweight through Leo Tolstoy.
What's Tolstoy's take?
Tolstoy presents an absolute moral axiom. Accepting the profound dignity of another person is mandatory.
He mentions that old Russian custom, right?
Yes, of bowing deeply when meeting a stranger. You aren't bowing to their social status. You are physically acknowledging the divine, irreducible spirit within them.
But how do those two coexist? Never commit to anyone versus bow deeply to the divine spirit in everyone. They feel fundamentally opposed.
They do, unless you apply them to different layers of human interaction. Greene isn't just about social dominance, it's about being deliberate with your deepest loyalties so you can actually govern yourself.
Okay, it's about boundaries.
Exactly. The mature position is to choose your commitments carefully. That's Greene. But when you do interact with someone, you always see the person in front of you as a sacred being, not a chess piece. That's Tolstoy.
Can you give an example of what that looks like?
Sure. Say you are a freelancer negotiating a contract with a really demanding corporate client.
Oh, I've been there.
Right. To survive, you have to use Greene. You protect your time, you don't overcommit, and you retain your independence.
So they don't consume your life.
Exactly. But when you are on a Zoom call with that difficult project manager, you use Tolstoy. You remember that they are likely stressed, overworked, and deeply human.
Empathy enforced by strong boundaries.
Yes. You can maintain absolute strategic independence without ever stripping the person across the table of their dignity.
Wow. But maintaining that delicate balance requires a massive amount of self-governance.
It does. Because if you lean too far toward Greene, you become a cynical manipulator. If you lean too far toward Tolstoy without boundaries, you become a martyr.
To balance that intense tension, you need a massive bedrock. And it's fascinating how the text addresses this because it brings in ancient texts like the Ten Commandments and the Book of Proverbs.
Which is a very interesting pivot.
It is. And just to be clear to you listening, we are looking at these texts strictly through the impartial lens of the source material. We aren't endorsing a religious stance here.
Right, it's about the psychological architecture.
Exactly. Exploring how the text frames them, not as a list of restrictive rules, but as a map of the territory in which a human life can flourish.
Because you cannot build your life if you cannot govern yourself. The commandments, in this context, set the outer boundaries of a functional society.
Like, don't bear false witness.
Right. If you continually lie, you eventually lose the ability to navigate the world because you surrounded yourself with a false map. It destroys the feedback loop of reality.
And while the commandments manage the external boundaries, the text uses the Proverbs to manage the interior space.
Yes, the emotional governance.
Like Proverbs 29.11. A fool gives full vent to his anger, but a wise man keeps himself under control.
Emotional governance is the prerequisite for everything else we've discussed. You can't take quiet, functional action if every minor inconvenience sends you into a rage.
You can't treat a difficult client with dignity if you are governed by spite. And breaking those old emotional loops requires a fundamental shift in perspective. The text layers an Albert Einstein here. We can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them.
To beat old fears, new thinking must enter.
Mm.
You can't logic your way out using the same fearful logic.
So you have to introduce a new paradigm.
And often, that new thinking is only forged in the crucible of difficulty. There's an anonymous quote in the text that captures this perfectly. Anyone who thinks that sunshine is pure happiness has never danced in the rain.
It's a vivid image, but practically, how does that change how we operate on a Tuesday afternoon when everything is going wrong?
It reframes our entire relationship with struggle. We spend vast amounts of our energy trying to avoid the rain.
The suffering, the resistance, the fear.
Exactly. We treat those days as detours from the good life we're supposed to be living. But the text argues that the rain isn't a detour from a good life. It is the journey,
The friction is the exact forge where your character is shaped.
which naturally strips away our arrogance. Emerson and Tolstoy both touch on this grounding thought of humility.
Just the sheer astonishment of being able to say, I exist, I can think.
When you orient yourself from that starting point, you realize how small you are in the grand scheme of time. Starting from there completely deflates your ego,
You stop demanding that the universe perfectly align with your desires.
and you start working collaboratively with the reality you actually have.
So what does this all mean? Bringing the entire deep dive full circle back to Thoreau's opening challenge to be good for something.
Right, the ultimate purpose.
We've mapped out how to use fear as a metal detector. We've explored the physics of quiet action. We've navigated power and dignity. But what is all this character building actually for?
The text reveals the ultimate answer with a daily affirmation. It says, be the spouse, the uncle, the sibling, the son, the friend, the teacher, the coach, the mentor that you wish you had when you were growing up.
Wow, that is a staggering standard to try and live up to.
It completely alters the paradigm of ambition. The war against resistance isn't fought for your own personal legacy. It's not about proving to the world how smart you are.
It's fought so you can become a specific, irreplaceable gift to someone else who needs you. Good for someone.
Exactly. It emphasizes Tolstoy's point that true charity is performed before eternal law, not for an audience.
It's completely decoupled from public performance.
It has to be. True goodness requires you to look at the landscape of your life, identify the gaps where someone needed guidance or patience, and say, I didn't have that person, so now I will become that person.
You are forging yourself into a tool that is good for someone. It's the total opposite of where we began, with that passive do no harm idea.
This philosophy demands a goodness that is fiercely active.
It requires stepping up to the plate when you are terrified, swinging the bat in the rain, and fighting a daily internal war against your own ego.
So that you can be of profound use to the people around you.
We've established today that fear is a compass pointing toward what matters, and that true character is built in quiet, imperfect repetition. So think about the person you most wish you had in your corner when you were growing up.
The advocate, the guide.
Exactly. What is the absolute smallest, quietest, most unglamorous action you can take today? Something so small you won't get any credit for it, to start becoming that exact person for someone else.